Now this is the story of the Last Supper. It's coming from Matthew 26 and from Luke chapter 22 and from John chapter 13. Now the Jewish religious leaders, they were planning and plotting how to arrest Jesus and have him put to death. And while they were plotting, Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, he came to the religious leaders, and he offered to betray Jesus or to deliver Jesus over to them for money, and they were delighted. So they offered him 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus, and Judas agreed to that, and he looked for an opportunity to deliver Jesus over to them. Now, it was the day on which the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed, so Jesus, wanting to celebrate the Passover with his disciples, sent James and John into the city to make preparations. And he told them that they would find a man carrying a water jar, and they should follow that man into a house, and they should say to the owner of that house, the teacher desires, now it's time for the teacher to eat the Passover meal or to celebrate the Passover meal with his disciples in your guest room. And that man would take them to an upper room, and there they should make preparations to eat the Passover meal. Now Peter and John, they went into the city and they found everything to be just the way Jesus had told them, and they made preparations for the meal. Then later in the evening, Jesus went there with his 12 disciples, and before the meal, Jesus, he took off his cloak, he tied the cloak around his waist, and he got a basin or a bowl of water, and he began to wash his disciples' feet and dry them off with a towel. And then Jesus said to his disciples, "Do you understand what I'm doing for you?" And then Jesus said, "If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet and set you this example, then you should also wash one another's feet. Now you should follow my example, and you will be blessed." Now, at the meal, Jesus was seated with his disciples at the table, and Jesus became sad, and he said to them that one of you will betray me. And then he said, the Son of Man will be betrayed into the hands of men, as God has foretold. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for that man if he had never been born. Now each of the disciples, they became sad, they looked at one another, they were astonished, and they each said, "Lord, is it I?" And then Jesus said, "I will dip my hand into the bowl, and the one I give the bread to, that is the one who will betray me." Now Judas Iscariot, he leaned over to Jesus and said, "Lord, is it I?" And Jesus said quietly to Judas, "Yes, Judas, it is you." And then Jesus dipped his hand into the bowl, and he gave the bread to Judas. And then Judas, he took the bread, he got up, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to Judas, "What you're about to do, go and do it quickly." And Judas left the room, and the other disciples didn't know why. Now at the meal, Jesus, he took bread, and he gave thanks for it, and he blessed it. He broke it, and he said to his disciples, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this whenever you eat it in remembrance of me." And then after the supper, he took a cup of wine, and he gave thanks for the wine, and he blessed it. And he said to his disciples, "Drink of it, all of you. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." And then Jesus would go on to tell his disciples that they should, that he was giving them a new commandment. And the new commandment was that they should love one another just as Jesus had loved them. And Jesus told them that all people would know that they were his disciples if they followed his example and loved one another as he had loved them. Now, after this, they prayed, and then they sang a hymn, and then they went out to the Mount of Olives. And this is the story of the Last Supper.